I have lots of impressions, and my mind and my heart is absolutely full of these thoughts and emotions as well, because diplomats are not people without emotions. Netherlands people are already very interested in Georgia in many ways. Tourists love to come and companies are interested. The core of diplomacy, to be diplomatic, to be respectful, but not to avoid sensitive topics, and that goes both ways. National identity is made of who we are collectively, including every citizen, including every religion, ethnicity, orientation. Oh, that's a difficult question. Georgians in general, if I may say something in general, are possibly more emotional people or exuberant or extrovert than many Dutch people, so I had to bridge that a bit myself. But as any diplomat, it's been a joy to find a common language and to understand each other with your own backgrounds and traditions. Mijn naam is Maaike van Koldam. Ik ben de ambassadeur voor Nederland in Georgië. En ik ben heel blij dat ik dit interview kan geven voor Sakartvelo Insight. My first steps in diplomacy were actually after I had already traveled a lot and lived abroad, and I studied languages. So I was looking for a profession that would enable me to keep doing that, but would also bring me to other countries, not just by myself, but representing my country, representing the interest of my country, but also promoting universal values, universal human rights, to make it a very valuable presence in other countries. And all of that, I think, all of those opportunities are being offered in being a diplomat, which is also a great responsibility, but I very much enjoy my profession. Well, in the Netherlands at high school you already study like French, English, German, but in university I studied Russian literature, and also Serbo-Croat at the time, and also some music, musicology, and all of that combined was a very valid entry point to become a diplomat. Well, after I graduated, I got a scholarship to study in Moscow musicology in the 90s. So I did. It was also a very difficult time in Russia, and I started working for an NGO in humanitarian assistance, and I also worked for a Dutch bank to set up a representative office. And then after those years, I decided I really wanted to go back home, but at the same time keep this experience of working abroad. So I applied for the ministry, and in the ministry I had different postings, as we always have. And I worked, for instance, my first posting was in Kazakhstan, also traveling to Kyrgyzstan, then back to The Hague, and I had a posting in Vienna in our delegation to the OSCE, where I was, amongst others, also responsible for all affairs related to Georgia and the OSCE. And then I went back to the Netherlands, and I had a posting in Chile, in Moscow, in Kiev, and now I'm here. So I'm really happy that I got to work in all those places. My next step is going to be Ireland. I'm going to be the Netherlands ambassador in Dublin, and I'm also looking very much forward to that next step, although it will be very hard to say goodbye to Georgia. Well, what I always try to do is not to compare countries one to each other. That's a bit of a mistake I could make professionally. I take every new country as it is, and I try to learn about it and know it in depth. And no matter what country you're in, there's always things that we can do together, and that's what I have enjoyed, and that's what sometimes is the challenge. And Georgia has offered all of that because of the transition it's going through, because of its aspiration to join the European Union. And so those are interesting points. Well, that's a very broad question, because luckily we have this broad history together. And if I start from the early 19th and the independence of Georgia from the Soviet Union, that was of course a very important moment historically. We established an embassy, and that's where the big friendship was even deepened. In all multilateral international fora, we support the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Georgia, which is very important because we are aware that Georgia is situated in a vulnerable position. So if I think on how we support and where we support, it's quite a long track record. We strive to do our best. Related to what I just mentioned, for instance, we are quite a big contributor to the EU monitoring mission, where we have Dutch monitors. We support Georgia, of course, in the implementation of the association agreement with the EU, particularly also on the DCFTA, the free trade agreement, where we have our own focus in agriculture, food safety. There's many more fields of cooperation, for instance, in trade, in investment. There is a bilateral trade investment protection treaty. And what's very valuable, also in the economic field, the Netherlands represents Georgia in the World Bank and IMF. So Georgia is in the constituency which is headed by the Netherlands, which also enables to have agreements between the ministries of finance in public finance. There's also other countries in our constituency, so we present others as well, but this enables us, this relationship enables us to have special technical assistance also with Georgia between our ministries of finance. Part of that, for instance, is implemented in financial literacy, also for young people, but there's many more relations that we have. And when I think about our relations in the past 30 years, what have been very crucial instruments is what we call our MATRA program and our Human Rights Fund. And the first program is specifically for societies in transition, and the Human Rights Fund, well, it speaks for itself. It's focused on human rights, media freedom, gender equality, LGBTQI rights, and other universal human rights. Well, we have an excellent relationship. We are very open and honest towards each other. We have an intense relationship, particularly now that we are teaming up to support Georgia in the important reform process on implementing the 12 priorities. It was really a milestone that Georgia received the European perspective. So that can't be stressed enough how important that was. So when there are so many things happening and so many reforms to be implemented, it's only logical that your relationship even further intensifies, also in the economic field, in the human rights field. And what I really appreciate is the hospitality we are enjoying here, the accessibility of our hosts, accessibility also in government structures. That is really a very good way to look each other into the eyes and exchange opinions. And a big part of our cooperation is also with civil society, which is vibrant and very strong in Georgia. Well, there's the instruments that I mentioned, and a lot of civil society organizations work in the fields that are important when it comes to EU integration. For instance, what I just mentioned, LGBTQI rights. There's universal rights and values which a country that aspires to become a member of the EU needs to adhere to and needs to protect. That's also one of the 12 priorities, to protect vulnerable minorities. So, and I don't even like to speak about minorities because everybody is a citizen of Georgia and deserves to fulfill their lives and to get protection if need be. So that is one area. But for instance, we also team up with other organizations who work on rule of law, independence of judiciary, and that is important for the investment climate and enables us and Georgia to attract foreign investment and businesses to come. Netherlands people are already very interested in Georgia in many ways. Tourists love to come and companies are interested, first and foremost in agriculture, horticulture, dairy industry, because that is what we are very good at, and we organize trade missions and all of that. I cannot deny that indeed when there is headlines on demonstrations on certain topics, including what we've seen in the past, unfortunately, on the issues that I just mentioned, that does affect thinking in the Netherlands. It gives a negative image at that moment. But I sincerely believe that many people in Georgia would like to present the country in a better way, and are doing their utmost to also highlight what is going very well. And we look at both things, and we really sincerely want to support all those who have the very best intentions. And there is a lot of them. And we also support, partially of course, Dutch companies who may want to invest, but we have other instruments. We have the Dutch Entrepreneurial Development Bank, FMO, and it provides financing to Georgian banks who then can give good credit to small and medium enterprise in Georgia, and also to female entrepreneurs, and also to smaller entrepreneurs, or maybe from a ethnic minority background outside Tbilisi. So indirectly, there's very strong ties. And just to make it more tangible, for instance, we once invited a group of female entrepreneurs to go to the Netherlands and do trainings, and we are still in touch with them, and I visit their businesses, and they do wonderfully well, and I'm always very impressed by their energy and motivation. Well, it's indeed what you mentioned is actually the core of diplomacy, to be diplomatic, to be respectful, but not to avoid sensitive topics, and that goes both ways. My approach has always been to remain respectful, to be honest, and Dutch people are sometimes considered to be a bit too blunt, so I'm aware of that can be the case. On the other hand, I have this disposition to speak out, and sometimes that's also appreciated because, well, you know what you're talking about, but it would also means that I need to be a good listener. It's not only speaking, it's not only sending messages, but it's really very important to listen to your interlocutor and to strive to understand each other. Oh, that's a difficult question. I'm really indeed impressed by the 80-90% of people who express their big support towards EU integration. And I don't only see that in opinion polls, I see that when I travel, I hear that when I speak to young people, to students, to high school students. And it's not only age, many people express that wish and their commitment towards that process. Sometimes some topics, which we very much see as universal values, can be abused and put into a wrong spotlight by others who want to discredit what the EU is. And one of those topics we already discussed is, for instance, LGBTQI rights, which are not uniquely EU norms and values, but which are universal human rights. And in our foreign policy, they're very, very important. And sometimes there is parties, forces who can depict them as you don't want that, it's contrary to your tradition, to your way of life, but that's not it. It's human values, it's the right of every individual to express themselves and to have that tolerance. And I think historically Georgia is known as a country of tolerance and hospitality. So it's important to have that clear and to not let, for instance, that topic be instrumentalized in hate speech, in anti-European language. Well, we have this bilateral agreement on protecting investments, which is an important agreement because there's quite a lot of investment from the Netherlands in Georgia and vice versa. But there's always, of course, also international courts of arbitrage if things go wrong. But it's good to have this mutual understanding. We have a taxation agreement that avoids double taxation. But we also have agreements that are maybe not a treaty, but that are very instrumental in teaming up. And for instance, one of those agreements is agreements between our ministries of finance in the framework of this constituency relationship. Well, the Netherlands is the second largest exporter of agricultural goods in absolute terms. So that's quite something. We are 17 million people in a very small country, but thanks to our high-tech and innovative agriculture, we export a lot. And that's so an area where we have a lot of expertise to share, trade, trainings, and some investment, yes. Well, that's also a very good topic. In education, we used to have bilateral scholarships for Georgian students wanting to study in the Netherlands. Unfortunately, we don't have those bilateral scholarships anymore, but of course our universities and high schools are very active in EU programs, in Erasmus+, and I meet, well, every week at least, I meet young Georgians who are going to study in the Netherlands in many, many fields. It can be in theology, in agriculture, in business administration, in languages, and it always makes me super proud. And I'm always very impressed because from these young people, I also hear that after their studies, they're eager to come back to Georgia to work with what they learned, and that's really very valuable. And in culture, we don't have a big cultural fund. We are a relatively small embassy after all. Most of our funds are in human rights. But we do strive to support cultural initiatives, and we've had some beautiful ones. Last year we had an exhibition of old 17th, 18th century Dutch maps on which you could see Georgia, and the exhibition traveled throughout Georgia, and that was a very moving exhibition also with universities. We have recently supported the Literature Festival at the Writers' House. There was a Dutch poet, and he met also his Georgian translator, and that was a lovely week. We support animation film festival in what is, I don't exactly, Nicosia. So we bring Dutch animators. We have also what is called the Prins Claus Fund, which enables to do restoration of cultural heritage in some countries. So for instance, the Silk Museum, which is a wonderful museum in Tbilisi, in the past we've also provided funds for renovation of part of the Silk Museum. And there's many more things that we strive to do. I really love that part of my work. Well, I consider myself very lucky to have a very good team at the embassy. So this enables us to work together on all these topics, on social issues, on human rights, on economic issues, cultural, public diplomacy. So I don't have to do everything by myself, and it's very nice to team up. Personally, I'm very much motivated to work in the field of human rights, universal human rights, as I just mentioned. That has been a bit my track record, also in political issues. But of course, all these things are intertwined, as I just mentioned, rule of law and investment climate. And I also have great admiration for the entrepreneurs who come and entrepreneurs here. So it's in a way holistic, as we have the embassy team and we can deal with these topics together. Emotionally strong is the meetings that I had. There was first 2 years of COVID, which unfortunately enabled us, we could not travel, meet or go outside. So after those years were sort of over, I could travel and go and meet people. And that's a whole chain of highlights, because I met people in universities, in villages, high schools, to speak about Georgia, to speak about their ambition, wishes, to answer all the questions about the Netherlands. And I often learn a lot about these questions, because it's very informative to look at your own country through the eyes of your host country. So that all those travels, all those meetings, also in Tbilisi, that is an absolute highlight. And for instance, last weekend I was in Ajara. It's a very impressive place. I met Georgian Muslim communities, old wooden mosques. I met the women who live in summer on the mountains herding their cattle. They welcomed me, told me about their life. And that's not a place that I would often or automatically go as a diplomat, but it's really in my brain, in my eyes, as a beautiful memory. You ask about maybe negative. I have to admit that an absolute negative, unfortunately, was the 5th of July 2021, the violence against Pride and media. That was a very black page, and we still feel, even though perpetrators of violence have received fines and punishments, sentences, we still feel that the organizers of the violence, more could be done to also prosecute, investigate them. The good side of, well, there's no good side of the 5th of July, but I was really very impressed by the 6th of July, when many Georgians came out to the street, no matter the topic, but they were demonstrating against the violence. So that showed me the very human face and the very tolerance and well wishes of many people who would not automatically be in that place on that day. And I'm very much looking forward to the Pride events that are going to take place now, that we expect to be well protected. And I hope that one day it will really be possible again to have a Pride March in Tbilisi, because it's a celebration of values of equality, and it is never a topic that can be used to divide people. And also on a positive note, I think opinion polls show that there is an increasing tolerance and understanding at large. So I think that's something to cherish and to keep working on together. I have lots of impressions, and my mind and my heart is absolutely full of these thoughts and emotions as well, because diplomats are not people without emotions. I think I'm optimistic. I'm optimistic for the very reason that I see this ambition, this strong will, with the people whom I'm meeting and to whom I referred earlier in this interview. That is the future of Georgia, and that is what I'm very sure will keep Georgia into the right direction. I am, of course, aware of currently the 12 priorities, the intermediate update which we got on 3 priorities being completed. On the other priorities, some work done, but also important priorities which need further work. Depolarization, de-oligarchization, judicial reform, media freedom. I, by the way, very much welcome the presidential pardon for Mr. Gvaramia. I think work needs to be done in those directions, and we sincerely wish and hope and want to team up with Georgia in making that happen, because it's a unique historic opportunity to make that happen. And I've met many people, also civil servants, who want to make that happen. And there is still time, and I think jointly that is the direction that Georgia is to take. Geopolitically, it's obvious. The world is in a very bad place at the moment after the horrible war that Russia has started against Ukraine, which it's almost incomprehensible that this started and that this is happening now. And because of my previous posting in Ukraine, it really affects. And I have great admiration of how Ukraine is defending itself, and the Netherlands is ready to support Ukraine as long as it takes, with whatever it takes. I'm also very much aware that for many Georgians, this brings back memories of the 2008 war. So and I am also aware of the geographical position of Georgia. So I understand that this is not the easiest place to be. Hence, also, for instance, again, our support to, for instance, the EU monitoring mission, which builds also at building trust and watching what's happening on the ABL and reporting on borderization. So that is a difficult situation, I understand that. What I also find difficult to understand sometimes can be some elements of a political climate, some very strong expressions across the board that I think what to make of that. And I would sincerely wish that more of a compromise were possible. For instance, the Shah-Michel agreement, which was facilitated last year by EU and US, was a very important agreement, and I would still wish all parties, again, across the board, to work together on implementing the elements of this agreement, which are also reflected in the 12 priorities. On the economic area, well, I think we may discuss this further in this interview, but again, the connection between rule of law, investment climate. And in the mindset of people, well, as I also meeting with the people who travel, there is the visa-free traveling, which enables Georgians to travel. although I'm also aware that not all Georgians may have the means to travel, for all Georgians, I do hope that this window on the world, this cooperation with Europe, and by the way, very important, all the projects that are implemented jointly also within Team Europe, which does a lot for agriculture, education, culture, and we are part of Team Europe. And that's also an occasion where many Georgians, also young Georgians, learn about Europe, learn to appreciate what they can do in their own country as well. My answer would be, you are not alone. There's many young people like you. And I very much understand certain feelings, and who am I to say what people should do? People are free to decide for themselves. But I feel that even amongst those who are leaving, in essence, there is this wish, many tell me that, to do come back, to work together, to do good for their country, to be with their family. So, and there's many of them. So I would encourage them not to give up, to team up, to maybe develop your own projects, which, by the way, we as Embassy also very much support. We have a program which trains young people from non-dominant ethnic groups to set up projects in their own communities. There's micro grants so that they can do this. And I recently met 20 of the grantees, and they tell me what they want to do in their own communities on gender equality, on education, sometimes on basic infrastructure, on environmental issues. And they are not alone either. There's many people like that. And there's also, and it's not always even a generational issue, it's there. So of course you're free in your own choice. I traveled a lot, I enjoyed traveling, and I'm happy for everybody who can, but don't give up and team up and look for positive ways to get your accomplishments. Well, I'm equally impressed with the strong women with whom I met. They are here, and it's impressive. And one of our priorities is indeed to have more gender equality and to enable these women to take their place where they should and could be with their talents, be it in politics, in economics, in education. And I am aware of also Georgia's history, where you had, I think, in the 5 strong women parliamentarians taking up this lead role. And I was, for instance, recently at an exhibition in your National Archive, which showed a Georgian nurse, a Red Cross nurse, who was also one of the first actually war photographers in the First World War, and her pictures and her diary is super impressive. So these Georgian women have always been there and are a very, very important source in society. And I met them again. I just mentioned my visit to Adjara, and I met a lady, possibly in her 60s, who told me that her dream had always been to study, to get a higher education. And her ambition in life is to have her children and grandchildren get that education, and they're having that education. So when I listen to that, I'm really impressed by progress that has been made, and I wish that to continue. Well, if I may, speaking about the chess player, we actually invited her as part of a project that we have on women in sports. And she spoke about her experience as an international chess player with young women in sports in Georgia. And another very good thing that I see in Georgia, more and more soccer teams by girls and women are set up. And actually, speaking about soccer, congratulations to Georgia for making it to the quarterfinals. We had yesterday the match between Georgia and the Netherlands. We invited the girls' soccer team from Titriscaro to train with the Dutch Young Orange team, and that was really wonderful. So in a way, that's also a role model. In what other fields? You have a female president, which is very, very good. We don't have a female prime minister. We so far did not have yet a female prime minister. So you have even a better role model than we have. I think in politics, more gender equality in politics would be important. And I think role models, the women are already there, but it may be good to give them even more the floor. When I speak about female entrepreneurs, there is these very talented female entrepreneurs and they sometimes unite, but they can be equally role models for young people who want to start up their businesses. Well, my first answer to this is not to present the presence of various groups as a danger to national identity, because our national identity is made of who we are collectively, including every citizen, including every religion, ethnicity, orientation. And that, I think, is a notion to keep very much intact. Otherwise, the moment you would put it into a context of threats or losing things, that's approaching it from the wrong angle and makes people vulnerable for perceptions that they may themselves not even feel or see it that way. And that is also my experience in traveling. I've been to Marniuli, Tetriskaro, to Pankisi, to Adjara, and I personally don't even very much like the word minority, because it's Georgian citizens like everybody else. So the better language, I would say, is the non-dominant ethnic or religious groups. I don't like to speak about sexual minorities because everybody is a person and is not defined by being a majority or a minority. But the challenge is indeed can be for small countries to incorporate everyone and to live together and have understanding for each other. It is possible, and it starts with having an open mind and having the right language, and again, not framing it as I just described. And I really, by visiting these regions, I think it's very much possible to keep stressing the human values, the personal contacts, understanding of each other. And the big part of that also is bringing people together. And it's also something that we strive to do with one of our projects. We have a project that actually does bring together young people from Armenian, Azerbaijani, ethnic Georgian background, and they speak together about their lives, about their villages, what they can do together, and that works very well. And it's a small project, but the fact that it happens and has such positive outcome tells me that there is this basis, and that is very possible to have. And by the way, is also, I think, part of Georgia's rich and long history. I have many recommendations because, as I said in the beginning, my heart and my mind is overflowing with impressions. Enjoy the rich cultural offerings that Georgia has. I am absolutely moved every single time I hear polyphonic singing. It's unique, it's brilliant, and luckily I had many occasions where the host presented musicians, singers. She will have that, and that's something to listen and to cherish. Many other things, of course. I would encourage my successor, as I would encourage any ambassador, to do travel, to meet people also outside official circles. I always very much appreciated to have an honest and sincere dialogue with my official host, with my government counterparts. I appreciate that that possibility has always been there. So that is a very good thing to do. And all the other recommendations, well, I would say they speak to themselves because they offer themselves. There's so many things to enjoy in Georgia. And also my advice to myself has been not to get carried away with big emotions. Georgians in general, if I may say something in general, are possibly more emotional people or exuberant or extrovert than many Dutch people, so I had to bridge that a bit myself. But as any diplomat, it's been a joy to find a common language and to understand each other with your own backgrounds and traditions.